So after watching that demo, I hope that got you inspired to automate some of the processes in your daily work. I'm quite sure if you look closely, there are enough processes that you do on a repetitive basis that you could automate. However, the question arises, why is RPA only taking off now? It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of cutting-edge technology implemented at play when robotic process automation is executed. And there are a couple of reasons why RPA is taking off now instead of a couple of years ago. And the first one is called the law of the handicap of a head start. Yes, that is actually a thing. It's a Dutch saying translated into English, but it is official. The other one is tech advancements, regulations, workforce expectations, and cost savings. These are the things that drive robotic process automation, and they ensure the big spike in usage that we are seeing now. So when we look at the first one, law of the handicap of a head start, that basically means if you take the graph effectiveness and time, and you look at organizations that are doing average, you will notice that innovators who usually pay a lot of money to get the latest and greatest with regards to technology, and that can be a very costly business. If you implement new technology, that is usually way more expensive than if you are a late follower and implement more standardized and tried and tested technology. So the graph of organizations that are usually trailing new technologies looks more like this, and is less expensive for them to invest in new technology. Now what this theory boils down to in practice is that when you have legacy applications, there is usually a return on investment on these applications. And a lot of companies know that there is better technology out there and know that their IT department can probably use an upgrade, but because it's so expensive and they did not get the full value out of their investment yet, usually they delay in investing into technology. However, RPA, because it lies on top of this application layer, can be a viable, cost-effective alternative. The second thing that is driving the spike in usage at this time is technology advancements. All technologies like screen scraping are now on a maturity level that they can actually effectively be used in organizations. This is one of the underlying technologies of most RPA platforms. Then there's also an increase in low-code platforms. And later we will discover that the combination between RPA and low-code platforms is actually a very valuable one, which allows you to prototype your products in a very effective manner. Also, the text and image recognition software is getting better, which is also one of the underlying technologies that is needed for RPA. Then there's AI and machine learning, which are not necessarily implemented in the RPA applications that we see. However, they do provide us with an opportunity to let the robots learn more easily so they can be better suited to automate processes. And finally, there's cloud technology, which also allows RPA to scale out more significantly. So, technology is also one of the driving factors that makes RPA so successful right now. Another one is regulations. RPA has a very easy way of tracking and auditing. So, with regards to regulations, there's way more scrutiny on organizations than there used to be. There's legal requirements, there's privacy requirements, local laws that might apply to you, financial constraints that are put on the organization, and there's usually industry standards that they have to adhere to. RPA, because of its transactional nature, can help you in these regulatory requirements. Another aspect that should not be underestimated is workforce expectations. A lot of new knowledge workers that come into organizations expect to add value by means of creative pursuits. They don't necessarily want to be bothered with these mundane administrative tasks that usually take up a lot of their time. There are numerous studies out there, but it turns out that about 40% of our time is actually wasted on repetitive tasks that can easily be automated. The entire promise behind robotic process automation is also that it makes work more interesting. And of course, lately, because of the pandemic, the need for cost saving has risen within organizations, so that is also a driver for robotic process automation, because all of the manual labor that you don't have to do for these repetitive tasks are actually cost saved. Alright, so those are the 5 main drivers that make robotic process automation a success at this time. In the next clip, we'll take a look at the pros and cons of robotic process automation, and whether or not it's the right technology for each organization. So let's take a look at that next. So obviously, there are a lot of benefits to robotic process automation. However, it would not be fair to say that there are only benefits. There is also some risk involved with implementing RPA. So let's take a look at the pros and cons of robotic process automation. The pros can easily be summarized as high return on investment, it's easy to implement, it's easier to reach compliance within your organization, we find that there is better employee and customer satisfaction, and it's very easy to upscale your RPA endeavor. However, there are also some downsides and risks. First of all, the cost of ownership can be high. The risk of technical debt is always present because of RPA. There are some challenges with governance of all the robots when you're using RPA at scale. there are always the security concerns that are related with new implementations of technology, and there are still technical limitations that might reduce the effectiveness of your RPA implementation. So let's first take a look at the return on investment. Obviously, this is one of the great drivers behind RPA. And as you can imagine, having a robot taking away all the repetitive tasks of a human can be a huge cost saver with regards to labor time. As you can imagine, implementing a new application will require first of all the application to be installed in the infrastructure, but also to be connected to the different systems in the organization, and you will require programmers to tailor the system to your specific organization. Usually there's training involved for the people using the system, so RPA can provide a huge benefit instead of implementing new applications. So when we look at the cost savings, usually there's money saved because less effort has to be done by the knowledge workers in your organization. There's increased accuracy, so there's less risk of your processes having to be redone because the data is inaccurate. And lastly, because time will be saved on these mundane tasks, there is more time for innovation between your knowledge workers. And that will increase the innovation in your organization, which is obviously hard to put a price on. The second benefit of RPA is that it's easy to implement. As stated before, RPA is nothing more than a new layer on top of the application layer. This is very easy to implement because you can basically mimic the actions that a human does and put them in the logic of a robot. So that makes for easy implementation of RPA, which is definitely a benefit. However, for the more advanced robots that do end-to-end process automation, there will be process analysis, maintenance changes, metrics, bot creation, and training involved, and those are aspects we will cover later in this learning path. However, the basic premise is that it's very easy to implement RPA in your organization and you can quickly gain benefits from implementing. These long-term larger implementations can be handled as a change process as any other in the organization. Then the third benefit is better compliance. Again, because of the audit trail that is possible and the transactional nature of robotic process automation, better compliance can be achieved by your organization. So we'll make less mistakes. There is an audit trail that can be followed, so you can always trace back what happened. And the knowledge in your organization, instead of being in the head of your knowledge workers, is now in the robot that is programmed. So it's easier to retrieve the knowledge in the organization, which can also be a huge benefit. There's also better employee and customer satisfaction. Again, most knowledge workers nowadays expect their work to make a difference. So they'd rather not bother with these mundane tasks that might be necessary, but not necessarily add value to the organization. When we free up the time of our knowledge workers, we'll have more time to interact with the customer, we'll have more time to look at creative endeavors, and we'll have more time helping in the automation of the organization. So this is definitely also a benefit of RPA. Now customers will most likely experience this by an increase in speed in which their requests to the organization are handled. And a final clear benefit of RPA is its rapid upscaling potential. If you have one robot, it's very easy to scale that up into multiple robots that they can have a huge output in the organization. If you compare that to scaling up when you need to hire persons, you'll need to go through the hiring process. They'll probably require training, either on the job or classroom training, and there might be a lot of contractual overhead involved. So compared to human capital, it is definitely easier to upscale a robotic workforce. It's not all benefits, there are also some inherent risks to robotic process automation. The first one is cost of ownership. Now, again, the return on investment is usually pretty good with robotic process automation. However, there are some things to consider. You'll have to pay for licenses for the applications that you use. There's employee time initially needed to actually program the robots. The maintenance of the robots and the IT infrastructure will have to be included in your IT maintenance plans in the organization. And although limited, there is still training involved for the employees that will actually be creating the bots. And if you want to go into a more large-scale implementation, you will require people to code to program the bots in your organization. Now, the second risk that comes with robotic process automation is that of technical debt. If you have your IT infrastructure and you build robots on top of that, the incentive to actually replace legacy systems is gone. So at some point, there's a risk of these systems not working anymore, and then the overhead layer of robots will also cease to work. So the risk of technical debt increases because there's less incentive for management to replace these systems that the software robots sit on top on. So that's why it's so important to make robotic process automation part of your total IT infrastructure. But more on that later in this learning path. Another issue you might want to consider is governance at scale. If you have two people that both have a robot that assists them in their daily jobs, there should not be a huge governance issue. However, if you have multiple people in your organization which are all using bots, it might become beneficial to centrally manage all of these robots, and most RPA applications still have some challenges in this area. And then there are also some inherent security concerns. Because RPA takes over some of the human transactions, there's always a security aspect that has to be considered. And lastly, there's still some technical limitations that make RPA imperfect. And these mostly evolve around the area of artificial intelligence and machine learning, because those technologies are not really mature yet, and if you do incorporate them in decision-making points in your processes, then you might be taking on more risk in your organization. And because of the screen scraping technology, it's also challenging to remotely use RPA applications. Now, this has become better in the last couple of months, but there are still some challenges for most RPA vendors out there. Alright then, so that was an overview of the pros and cons of robotic process automation. In the next module, we will take a look at the specific processes that are best suited for automation through robotic process automation. However, let's first do a recap of this module.